and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston, I'm your host, and we're recording this episode on a Friday morning, just 2 days after Manchester United crashed out at the Carabao Cup with a really poor performance against Newcastle. They lost 3-0 at Old Trafford. Another disappointing display from Erik Ten Hag's side. And in this podcast, we're going to look into that performance. Basically, another inquest, unfortunately, after the Manchester City game. Discuss what it means for Erik Ten Hag's future and look ahead to the weekend because, of course, they are playing Fulham as the early kickoff on Saturday. And to join me in this podcast, our Chief United correspondent, Samuel Luckhurst. Samuel, how are you?
Not bad, thank you. You did a very good job saying all that with a straight face as well.
I've told you.
Given your allegiance.
Completely professional.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, Samuel, as I've said, it is another inquest. We're sat here on Monday after the Manchester City game and we went on for 15 minutes and got really sunk our teeth into that. Here we are doing the same again against Newcastle. A really poor performance, as I said in my intro. I mean, that first goal, where do you start? It was just so poor and there's really pressure mounting on Erik Ten Hag now.
It's so bad a former Manchester City player who was on media duty was getting wound up by how bad United were. Neda Manura, who is a very articulate Manchester lad who came through City's academy and does a lot of media work these days. I actually caught him celebrating Ilkay Gundogan's first goal at the FA Cup final in the press box, which isn't great, of course, not press box etiquette, but he, speaking to a colleague who was sat near him, they said he was getting just wound up to high heaven by how abysmal United were. So that's, again, when Arsene Wenger's feeling sorry for you, when a former City player is getting wound up by how bad you are, that's how bad it is. And as soon as the first goal went in, I don't think anyone of a United persuasion in that stadium felt that there would be a comeback, that they would recover from that. Newcastle were brilliantly backed with their following, which made it a really good atmosphere. Sometimes with those League Cup ties, they're better atmospheres than the FA Cup, even though the FA Cup's the more romanticised competition. But I was struck, one, by the team Ten Hag picked, just too frivolous, which is a departure from the norm for him. He usually doesn't rotate en masse, pick strong teams. You could say that is a strong team. I would argue that any team that has Anthony Marshall up front is blunt immediately, and he was abysmal again. I mean, just even at 0-0, some of the infighting, frankly, between the players, like Anthony turning and having a pop at Dalot when he'd overhit a pass, Marshall throwing his hands in the air. I think Maguire and had a bit of a pop at Dalot as well, and look, Dalot was a walking disaster in that half and absolutely had to come off at half time. But there's just no harmony in that team at the moment. They're not united in any sense of the word. They've just got problems in literally every position. I mean, I wrote yesterday how they're morphing into that David Moyes tweet from 10 years ago. When
said that on the podcast a few weeks ago.
I know they are pretty much bad at everything at the moment. They're bad at defending, they're bad in midfield, they're bad at scoring goals, they're not even scoring goals. And we're in this cycle again where it does feel like the manager, there's no way back for him. But this does feel very different to previous managerial changes that United presided over, when it did feel like it was the final days for the manager. With Ten Hag, I don't think the game's up yet, but he is. I mean, he's going towards the end game. The way it's going, it's just not sustainable. With five defeats at Old Trafford alone this season, they've conceded 3 goals against 4 of those opponents. Crystal Palace haven't won a game since they won at Old Trafford, and that was in, what was it, late September, I think it was. It was, yeah, so that it wasn't even quite October yet. You could talk all day about how bad United are at the moment, and unfortunately for them, they've not finished this squad rebuild under Ten Hag, and already it feels like a new rebuild is required. And if you're to have a new rebuild, normally that means a new manager coming in. I think the caveat with this one is that Ten Hag has banked quite a lot of goodwill with the supporters. I don't get the sense that the matchgoers have turned on him yet. I've not seen any of us who go to Carrington every week, who go to the games every week, who've written a piece yet that he should be sacked. We had written that piece by this time 2 years ago with Solskjaer while he was still clinging on. But I still don't. I think it's gone too far, unfortunately, for Ten Hag, that he's going to make United a true, credible force. So there's an argument. That's an argument itself that people may say, well, what's the point continuing with him? But unlike with previous managerial changes, as I alluded to earlier, there is not a clear candidate to come in. And also, why would you? I mean, I'm sure some people would mention Roberto De Zerbi, but he'd probably go the way of Graham Potter at Chelsea, another basket case of a club. So it's, without wanting to get too far ahead of ourselves, because there's the aspects of the game to dissect as well. I really don't think Ten Hag should be sacked, but I am struggling to see how it gets better anytime soon.
We'll look into that a bit more, I think, in the second part. But I mean, the unwanted record's just stacking up. As you've said, they've lost 5 of the 10 home games. That's the first time since 1931. They've made their worst start of the season since 1962, and it was Newcastle's biggest away win at Old Trafford for 93 years. I mean, some of the stats this season, some of the unwanted records are just sobering reading.
Tumbling, aren't they?
Yeah, they really are. Let's just get into the individual performances then. I mean, you mentioned Dalot in your first answer. It was a disaster class, I think it's fair to say. That first goal, Garnacho gets tussled off the ball. Livramento breaks forward. Mount, he's a bit of a ghost, you just can't get near him.
Yeah, it's a hologram.
Yeah, exactly. And then, I mean, Dalot as well, the positional awareness was just completely lacking. Almiron shouldn't have got there. He's a right winger as well, and he's been playing the left, and he finishes. And then Dalot was brought off at half-time, which really wasn't a surprise. I've always said on the podcast, I've had doubts over Dalot's defensive abilities, and that was exposed again the other night, wasn't it?
He will not be starting at Fulham tomorrow, I think it's safe to say. It would be pretty amazing.
Wan-Bissaka looked quite good at you when he came off.
Well, at 2-0 in the second half, you thought if United got a goal, there might have been something to cling on to there. But that's it's like the Alan Partridge quote. Still good news about the chocolate oranges, with Wan-Bissaka coming back in. But Dalot's form all year has been really poor, and he got a new contract on the back of 5 mediocre months. He's got worse since he got that contract. I think also the thing about Gary Neville's saying this dressing room isn't a bad set of lads, and I do agree to an extent, but my goodness, they do have some selfishness about them. And you look after, not even 24 hours after that Newcastle defeat, Dalot shared an Instagram story about, here's my goal of the season, goal of the month contender against Sheffield United. What United fan looks at that and thinks, I really want to see that, I like that. A proper United fan, not someone who just taps the heart icon in an instant on Instagram. And that just winds up fans. Marcus Rashford on his birthday, he had a party after the derby, which is just a no-no anyway, as we spoke about on Monday's podcast. But his post on Tuesday about, was it striking fear and being a menace? I'm thinking, you've got 1 goal in 13 games for United this season. Where's the self-awareness? But if it's going to fuel the brand, if it's going to shift some boots, if it's going to get some likes on Instagram, they're all for it. And that's the modern generation. But you've got to pick and choose your moments. I go back to when Ander Herrera was at United, he had a sponsors engagement scheduled for post-match, I think it was against Middlesbrough. I'm pretty sure it was New Year's Eve. And he said, before the game had even started, he said, I'll do it if we win. If we lose, I don't want to do it. Or if we draw, I don't want to do it. That is absolutely the right mentality to have. It doesn't matter what generation you are, you just got to have your head screwed on with those things. A lot of these United players, their heads are falling off, metaphorically, whether it's off the field, on the field. And I'm in terms of individual performances, that's an easy one that you make at the weekend. It's Dalot out, Wan-Bissaka in. But Ten Hag is scrambling for solutions, and he is someone who doesn't know what the solution is at the moment. There were more half-time changes the other night. Fair enough, the Casemiro one was enforced, but when it happened at the time, I think a lot of us sensed he's just hooked him because he's been dreadful again. And that's 2 games running for Casemiro with United, where he's come off at half-time, and he was abysmal against Brentford, and that was tactical. Okay, the other night it was enforced. But when I looked at that team, I just thought, having after everything we said on Monday about turning the page, put players in who can, implement the style and get you playing in the way that you want them to play, and then you see Marshall on the team sheet, and that in itself is an argument not to sack Ten Hag, because the prospect of Anthony Marshall outlasting another Manchester United manager would be a scandal. This is someone who allowed his agent to undermine Jose Mourinho, whose agent, the day before Mourinho was sacked, said, I'm pessimistic about Anthony Marshall signing a new contract. Mourinho sacked the next day, that's December 18th. January 31st, Anthony Marshall gets a new 5-year contract. So they changed their tune pretty quickly. This is also a player who Ralph Rangnick said refused to play against Aston Villa in January 2022. He shouldn't still be at the club. And he really does epitomise everything that is rotten about Manchester United as far as the playing staff goes. He shouldn't have been starting that game the other night. But that's the poor planning of United. They signed a striker in the summer who's too callow, who's an unknown quantity, who's not got a good enough goal scoring record. He's trying his heart out. He's got a good connection with the fans, but he's not got someone to ease the burden on him. Højlund's profile is the same as Javier Hernandez in 2010. When Hernandez came in, that squad had Berbatov and Rooney as strikers. Seasoned, Premier League proven, experienced. And it worked out brilliantly. They won the title that season. United just do not have that dynamic there at the moment. Mason Mount, that's a mismatch, him and Casemiro.
The video of him going around at the end of the game and he's applauding supporters.
Yeah.
I think Chelsea fans have picked that up quickly and said
he used to do
he
that.
always used to do that at Stamford Bridge.
And look, you don't want to knock him for doing that, because he could have, they could have been lobbing tomatoes at him or lettuce or what have you. Maybe not
Cabbages.
This day and age, cabbage, where Steve Bruce, you had to bring him up, didn't you? Or allude to him at least. But you don't want to give him too much of a whipping for that. But it's something that Chelsea fans have pointed out that I certainly wasn't aware of, and you do start to wonder, well, is that just doing it for your own self-interest? But I don't think Mount is a bad lad as such. I mean, he's not exactly talking a great deal, but there's a reason for that, because he's not playing.
Has Mount not got the same problem? I wrote this article 2 days ago as Jadon Sancho, in the sense that he's came to the club, Ten Hag wanted him to play a deep end midfield position, but which position is actually his best? He's probably best as number 10. We know he played on the wing for Chelsea, he was effective there. He's yet to really hit the ground running in that role at United. Which area is he going to be used in? And I think that's a problem. I saw that with Sancho when we've discussed his minutes to goal ratio was so much better on the left. Yeah, he's playing on the right and he was kind of flipping between those sides. He was playing in the central position. And if you can't have a settled position and the manager doesn't know where you're best, you can't find rhythm or form, can you? And I saw that with Mason Mount in these first few months. Where's he going to be best? I mean, he was saying the players in number 8, but that's problematic, isn't it?
I was speaking to a fan about this, and they were saying that Mount, and I think his former coach at Chelsea, who's now, I forgot his name, but he's now with Tuchel at Bayern Munich, and he gave a very good interview to the Sunday Times just over a month ago, and he was adamant that Mount will be a success at United, and he might not be as adamant about it now. But with Mount, the fan was saying to me that he seems to thrive in structures, and he's got a similar player than Fernandes, who seems to thrive in a team that plays in moments, which was the case in certainly Solskjaer's United. Last season, I think Fernandes, he adapted pretty well, and he played out of position at times and had good impacts there. His form has fallen off a cliff this season, but people still look at Fernandes and they don't see a structured player, someone who's going to retain the ball. It feels strange that once upon a time City looked at him, because he seemed like a massive mismatch to go into Pep Guardiola Manchester City side.
But then again, it's way easier to go into that team and really excel and kick on in a winning team and under Guardiola.
Yeah, and that probably would have happened because City's recruitment hit rate is so good as well, and Guardiola is the best coach in the world. He's one of the greatest coaches ever. But those two players in the same 11, it just doesn't feel that the balance is quite right there, and something has to give. And okay, you're not going to play that way every week, but Mount already he's played in midfield. He played on the right against Brentford. He certainly played as a number 10, maybe not in a competitive game, but he did certainly in pre-season. And if you say we really need a midfielder in, they've got to be playing in midfield consistently. But I just think him and Casemiro is a mismatch. And with Casemiro, as Ty has said before, it's getting to the point, and it's the same with Varane as well, that if you are Ineos coming in, if you are a new football director coming into the club, if you're John Murtough who's going to be sticking around, you want to be getting on the blower to Saudi Arabia next year, because the wear and tear is starting to show them. Varane we were told he was ill the other night as well.
Is that not a bit suspicious as well, Samuel? I know it's
some fans will be suspicious of that.
I mean, tactical reasons was that's what the explanation was, Ten Hag before the derby. If you're Varane, if that is the genuine reason, you are going to be a bit grieved at that when Johnny Evans is starting ahead of you.
Well, I mean, that's a separate story altogether with Johnny Evans. Just in terms of the direction and the running of United, you know, Johnny Evans is released by Leicester, and someone says, "Oh, you live in Hale, come into training. Oh, do you fancy going on the pre-season?"
But then if you're Varane and you see Evans start over you, it's rough for Varane.
Yeah. Oh, do you fancy a start against Sterling Haaland in Manchester derby? It's that is a jobs for the old boys culture, which I thought United had eradicated. And it's peculiar that it has happened with Ten Hag. And in fairness to Evans, prior to the derby, I think he'd done pretty well in his starts against, was it Burnley, Brentford and Sheffield United. But it's Burnley, Brentford and Sheffield United. And then you're coming up against best goal scorer in the world and the best team in the world. And he was shown up.
And the inevitable happened.
Yeah. That defence was asking for it. At the moment, it just feels like they're extremely limited as to what they can do defensively, because Reguilon, although again, you know, he puts a shift in, there's a reason why Tottenham deemed him expendable, and he was the third choice left back there, and he was sent out on loan to Atletico Madrid last season. And again, the circumstances weren't great. United had a bad injury to Luke Shaw. They had to get someone in late in the day. They wanted Cucurella, but then they had to move on to Reguilon. You know, they did the best they could. It's not ideal circumstances. But again, it's another signing that has not been successful so far, and probably will not be successful as well.
Well, that's a lovely little segue into Anthony then, because supporters, I mean, if they weren't sick of him last season, they're really tired of him this time around. 86 million invested into him. We talked about him on the podcast on Monday, and I suggested that could he be remembered as potentially the worst signing in United history, and it seems to be getting that way. I mean, Lewis Hall, left back, he's 19 years old. He had absolutely no trouble against them. Had him in his back pocket all game. You had obviously Paul Dummett and Emil Kraft. Kraft has just returned from a
40 months
out.
Yeah,
I think 40 months on the sidelines with a nasty knee injury. And I mean, that's a championship pairing at best. That back four was in trouble the whole game, and Anthony was really terrible again.
This might shock people listening, but when the teams dropped, a lot of people in the press room, and myself included, I even said I think United will win this, because I looked at Newcastle's team and I just thought...
Seven of those Newcastle starters haven't started a Premier League game this season, and they won 3-0 at Old Trafford so comfortably as well. I mean, that's so damning, isn't it?
Yeah. Newcastle's fullbacks the other night would get into United's team easily at the moment. Newcastle are a very good example of why the sporting director, the director of football, wherever you want to assign the title, that appointment is becoming as key as a manager now.
I said after the takeover that Dan Ashworth would be potentially the most important signing.
I think he's. I think at the moment he's best in class as far as the Premier League, the Premier League sporting directors go. He's got a very good track record. It's not just at Newcastle. He did a brilliant job at Brighton. He oversaw very good work at the FA.
West Brom as
well. So he's a very experienced chap, but he's clearly going to be on a very good earner at Newcastle United, and they would be loath to lose him. I mean, I think that's a very tall order for United if they were to even try and poach him. I know Ineos with Nice and their sporting director, I think they got the guy in from either Lille or Lens, and it was seen as quite a coup, but it's very different in the Premier League, of course. And I mean, Livramento he looked very good at Southampton, and I think the potential was there. And it's a strange thing with Chelsea, because they have let some very good fullbacks go in recent years. And I thought Lewis Hall was terrific when I watched him. He was one of the few shining lights in Chelsea's season last season, but they sold him, and I'd certainly have him in over Chilwell. And I think it's a matter of time, as you said, until he ousts Dan Burn in the Newcastle team. And that's just good. That's good planning. And they had quite a few fullbacks in their team the other night as well, didn't they? Newcastle.
I think it was five fullbacks.
Yeah, but
in the side.
The tactics worked, and
no recognised striker as well. Anthony Gordon playing down the middle.
No, and this was a team as well that the previous week they hadn't won either of their games. Disappointment against Dortmund. I suppose they were disappointed as well not to have won at Wolves, given the way the scoring went in that game. But they turned up United with essentially a second string, and there was confidence about them, there was a vibrancy about them. When they went 1-0 up, it was deserved because they were by far and away the more assertive and confident side. You felt it from the backing they had in the stands. And really, it played out like a uproarious night at St James's Park for them, with 7,000 odd Geordies supporting them as well. It was, I mean, that United were effectively reduced to an away team on their own patch for the second game running. And again, like harking back to Solskjaer's final weeks, some of the chanting that was going on from away fans, like I think Leeds, City, Liverpool fans, they're all chanting "Ole's at the wheel." Solskjaer must stay might have been another one as well. Ten Hag is starting to cop similar treatment, and when that starts to happen, and if it's coming from one of your biggest rivals in the case of City, then again some might hear that and think, look, there can't be any way back for him. But I maintain, I'd say there are bigger problems at United, and there are just some players there that supporters, even as journalists covering them, we're sick to our back teeth at the sight of them, because we've seen it all before. We've had their number for a number of years. But United, they're still at United and they're still playing for them.
I think it was the first time this season you're getting sacked in the morning was brought out to Erik Ten Hag, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Correctly.
Yeah. Brentford fans might have. I can't quite remember clearly, but that was certainly the clearest and the loudest that has been chanted.
We'll be back in a moment for part 2, but that's it for part 1. Welcome back to part 2 of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, I'm going to start this part, Samuel, by you're going to give a little expansion on your line today. Was it today or yesterday that there was increasing unrest among United players after that result, of course? So I think it was yesterday, wasn't it? Actually,
yes.
That was.
Yeah.
So could you expand on that, please?
This always happens when things start to spiral. I did a story slightly similar to it in September, and I was told there's one player in particular who's unimpressed, not just with the state of the club, but also Ten Hag's handling of him. Players have been growing weary with criticism. The infighting, inverted commas if you want to call it, in terms of what we'll call it bickering, that you see on match days, it can be a bit more, frankly, quite bitchy among the players as well. There's a strange bitchiness about Manchester United players towards each other, like this. Footballers will talk publicly about, oh, it's great to have competition, but privately they say very, very different things. And there are doubts about Ten Hag now. His tactics. The Brighton game was one where I think a lot of players were starting to look at it and think, where are we going here, changing these tactics so swiftly, so quickly on the eve of a game. They felt they were in an invidious position that day, and not a lot has really changed in terms of United's performance level. They are playing in more a settled I call it a structure, settled formation. Yeah, but again, this happens. I mean, I've no idea, and I don't really care if supporters get wound up of negative coverage, but our job is to find out what's going on. And at the moment, a lot is going on at Manchester United, and it's not happy news, because they're losing a lot of games. They're 9 points off the top 4. They're out the League Cup. They're in danger of going out the Champions League, having lost 2 of their first 3 games. It's not going to be positive PR. I think it's safe to say that is how it works. And a lot of colleagues have done similarly themed stories as well about the crisis United are mired in at the moment. And yeah, I don't really understand why some fans think that it's outrageous that journalists write that way. I mean, it happens in in politics, certainly.
Some people don't understand journalists are not cheerleaders. They're journalists. They're there to do their jobs.
Yeah, journalism isn't a popularity contest. I think there are one or two who think it's a popularity contest who will remain unnamed. But in the case of those one or two, I've certainly never seen them in a press box. They operate in a very different way, and they do it for the attention, and they do want the popularity, and that's their choice. But when you're covering a club and you're going to the games and you're seeing with your own eyes what the hell is going on, and you're trying to find out as much as possible what's going on behind the scenes as well, you are duty bound to report that. And it's similar in other areas of news, like politics in the UK over the last decade or so. What a tumultuous time that has been. And the most striking news stories are all about where it went wrong for Liz Truss during a 44-day reign, when she lasts as long as Brian Clough at Leeds and things like that. And something has gone wrong there, and you want to find out why it went wrong and how it went wrong. And that's the essence of journalism. But also, I actually had a conversation with a United player's father about this last season, because he wanted to speak to me about something that he deemed was negative. And I actually said to him, "Did you read this feature I wrote on your son?" He hadn't. And I said, this was the headline. This was how positive it was. "Did you read this feature?" No. So the irony is that they will, a lot of fans or parents or of players, or even players sometimes, they will home in on negative, and they will completely overlook the amount of positive pieces that you have written about them. I actually told a Manchester United player who had a pop at me outside the team coach at Southampton last year. I said, "I have criticised and praised everyone on that bus," because he said to me, and I said to him, "Look, I take that as a compliment in a way." He said, "You're the only name that gets brought up about negative coverage." And that's the position you're in, because if I'm going to literally every United game and covering them as minutely as I am, and as you are as well, where we have to write pieces pretty much for every day of the week, then it's going to get a lot more attention than some of our colleagues who cover United and cover City, or don't have as intense demands on us. I'm not saying they don't have intense demands to extent, because United at the moment, there's a hell of a lot of coverage about it, but
the extent of
we're the Manchester Evening News, and we only cover two clubs in essence, really, which are United and City, and everyone knows how scrutinised and how much traction Manchester United get, and that's just the hand we've been dealt.
And I tell you what, the Talking City podcast before we just came in, but it was nice and rosy, wasn't it? The Man City lads talking on that podcast over there.
It must go swimmingly for Saibaikowski, yeah.
I mean, we've talked about the dressing room and wrestling there, Samuel. But I mean, we've saw this film before. It's the exact same script. Happens time and time again. Regardless of who is in charge. We saw it with Mourinho, we saw it with Solskjaer, we're now seeing it with Ten Hag, where these players are turning against the manager, and it just can't keep on happening. You said about Marshall, it would be a scandal if he outlasted another manager. Look, Ten Hag's not blameless, we've covered that to the nth degree. There's so much wrong at the moment, tactics, recruitment, etc. But the players are not delivering. We've just talked about Newcastle having 7 starters who haven't started a Premier League game. There's enough talent on that pitch to beat Newcastle. It's just not good enough.
They had those Newcastle players had the hunger to.
They were everything
to
Manchester United aren't at the moment, aren't they? That dressing room at Newcastle.
I mean, Joe Willock is a pretty decent footballer, but he's obviously not a starter for Newcastle anymore because of the recruitment they've made, I suppose, and certain players coming in. But by God, did he take his chance the other night? And I get it, when things are not going well, it's very easy to see how players can succumb to pressure, and that one mistake it can lead to a goal, and you think, God, the weight of the world is on my shoulders here, and they really feel it. But you've got to snap out of it, and if you're at Manchester United, you've got to think there's a reason for that, and you've got to show it as often as possible.
There's something culturally just wrong in that dressing room. I mean, you've talked about the players that have been there for 7-8 years. You just need to not fumigate it, just overhaul it all, just start again. I mean, even players like Rashford or Fernandes, who've been fantastic for the club, I guess they've all contributed to this problem over the last 7 years, 6 years. Even the good performers, the standout performers, there's just something so wrong for me within the club.
I think Fernandes got a bit of stick after the derby from some fans because they suggest that he didn't applaud them as he went off. I mean, Rashford, in terms of the choice of having a party on the night of the derby, I mean, that would have been arranged weeks in advance. He would have known it would have fallen on the derby. He would have also known, looking at it objectively, there was a high probability United were going to lose that game. And also, there was also a chance that he was going to get photographed. Now, he actually didn't get photographed. He managed to hide from them, but there's still no hiding place from it. Everyone knows he was there. And we're speaking ahead of the press conference. I guarantee you, as bad a week as United have had, that question will get asked at Carrington today. Because if Ten Hag wants to be selfish about it, and it might not be the right way or the constructive way of going about it, but if he wants to divert attention away from him, he could very easily do it with that. And it'll be interesting to see how he goes about it and how he handles it. But there's too much self-interest, as I just touched upon. I mean, Diogo Dalot, who is not a bad lad, he's very polite. He's one of the few players who's actually talked to us this season as well. He's been overworked, I think, in that sense, if not overworked on the pitch. But it's sometimes you just need someone to oversee things and be completely objective to say, look, that's not a good look. It might just be an Instagram story. It might disappear in 24 hours, but people will clock it. There might be a website out there that will do something on it, and it will go on from there, and it's bad publicity for you, even though you're looking for good publicity.
Even if someone said that, it's just not, do you not just think they might not care?
There is nothing you can gain out of that. You've just had a dreadful first half. You've been hooked at half time. Nobody cares about your goal against Sheffield United that the goalkeeper should have saved. And it seems like a really minor thing, but and again, I'm singling out a player who is in essence as I said, he's a good character. He's not a bad lad at all whatsoever. I've written how what a good personality is and what a good presence he is, and when he is on it, when he is performing, but he's not been performing, and he's not the only one who's done that. There've been lots of players at United through the years, and. Again, a supporter, season ticket holder, was telling me that he feels like the ramifications of the Sanchez deal are still being felt, because where his wages were elevated, that meant the next year David De Gea's had to rise, and then other players will want parity or close to parity. And it's not a coincidence in the case of Dalot and Rashford. They've had new contracts earlier in the year, and their form has got worse since then. I don't think you can just dismiss that. And it seems like United are the only high-profile club that when they dole out these contracts, the players become demotivated. They've got to wonder why that is. I said, I think last summer, I said that they should stop with this whole 5-year contracts. You should cap it more at 4 years, keep players on their toes, make them earn it a little bit more. And it's easier said than done, and you're in a bargaining position, you're negotiating, you want a player to stay. If it means just giving him 1 more year, okay, so be it. But it's the appearance of it can be quite damaging. But
again, that comes from the top, doesn't it?
It does,
it's a structural thing.
Yeah, and everyone knows. We've not mentioned the Glazers, but we don't need to. Everyone knows that they are the biggest problem at the club. Nobody is pretending otherwise. But I guarantee you, when Diogo Dalot is dawdling and Miguel Almiron is out sprinting him, he's not wondering, is Sir Dave Brailsford going to be the director of football next year? Is Sir Jim Ratcliffe going to be sat in the stands watching me and want to sign a new right back? That will be the furthest thing from those players' minds. I actually think some of them won't even care about the takeover situation particularly much. It's a non-takeover situation. But I just look at that squad and I look at some of the players and I just
how are you still here, basically, is the essence of it. We'll go back to Ten Hag then. I mean, if you look at the odds and the possible replacements, I mean, Zinedine Zidane, Hansi Flick, Graham Potter, you mentioned, Roberto De Zerbi, Nagelsmann, Carrick and Conte. I mean, that is not an inspiring list, and that's a problem within itself. You discussed the kind of boom-bust Manchester United cycle in the first section. I mean, if you're going to sack Ten Hag, there's nobody to come in. No. And even if there is, someone's going to come in, it's going to be an upturn of results, key players will discover a bit of form, It'll go on for a season and the same problems will happen again. And I guess that's an argument to keep Ten Hag, because this cycle has to end at some point. The club's in purgatory.
Whenever there's been a managerial change at United, and including when Ferguson stepped down, when he was retiring, there was always an outstanding candidate. With Ferguson, it should have been Mourinho. He erred badly.
Guardiola.
In picking Moyes.
Guardiola would have been
that, I maintain that was like the Labour Party deciding that Ed Miliband should be made leader.
That was the
rather than
bacon
David
sandwich's
Miliband.
fault, though. In the case of his brother, when he ate the sandwich. But yes, you're right.
That
It
was
should have
the
been David
election.
Miliband in the first place.
But it should have been Mourinho. When Moyes was sacked, they could have. It was almost like they had the pick of the lot. Really, there were so many candidates that Klopp was the fans' favourite. But by that time, they'd lined up Van Gaal, so there was clearly a choice there. When Van Gaal should have been sacked in the December of 2015. Mourinho had to come in. He eventually did in the May. When Mourinho was sacked, everybody assumed it would be Pochettino sooner or later. It didn't work out for Pochettino. When Solskjaer was sacked, again, Pochettino seemed like the obvious choice sooner or later, and Ten Hag was also a credible candidate, and there were others as well. I mean, before Solskjaer was sacked, I think Brendan Rodgers would have had quite short odds because he was doing quite well at Leicester, but then the timings didn't work out for him, and he's ended up at Celtic again. This time, there's no one, whether they're attached to a club or unattached, who screams Manchester United material. I mean, I'm sure there are some online fans who are saying, "Oh, get Zidane in," as if that's a constructive
Can I throw
career.
a left field name? I mean, he's not been sacked yet, and he's far from it. I think, well, not far from it, but I think he'll survive until the November national break at least. We'll discuss that in a moment. But Kieran McKenna, Ipswich. See, it's brilliant to the listeners of the podcast.
I'm not surprised that you've mentioned him. I mean, he's doing a great job.
Go on YouTube and check Samuel's faces out sometimes when I say things to him, because it's
he had a very good reputation at United. He had a very good reputation at Tottenham when he was the youth team coach there, and he's doing it is a genuinely great job at Ipswich. If he was having got them promoted last season, if they were to get promoted to the Premier League, they've been out of the Premier League since 2002, and they were in it for a fair few seasons when it was incepted in 92. So this is a long time out of the top flight. If he ever sees that is a tremendous job, and you could argue, well, he's got the know-how at United, and that he spent a lot of time there, but you need a bigger character of manager, I think, and you need.
The problem is, it's just not a name. I mean, Zidane would be that name, I guess, who is a big character, but he's not exactly. Is he tactically?
It's such a
good enough for Manchester United.
Look, when they sacked Solskjaer, Zidane was available and they didn't go near him. And although Cristiano Ronaldo would have liked them to have and was lobbying very much on Zidane's behalf, they didn't. And I mean, I don't think for a single second United should ever go near Zidane. The squad he inherited at Real Madrid was one of the best squads in the 21st century there's been in club football.
It just seemed like someone needed to babysit that squad.
Yeah, it did.
They were going to do well.
Yeah. And you're personable, and he was a great player, and he had great players, and there was just this, they were kindred spirits. And he had the greatest goal scorer of all time. He had one of the best midfielders ever, brilliant defenders. And if everyone was performing, the chances are they would win things, and they did. And they were very consistent about it, winning 3 European Cups in a row. And
can't complain on
that. No, and it's staggering. But there's a reason why the coach who's won 3 European Cups in a row has not coached at another club. Or, I mean, there's been some chat about him maybe taking over as France national.
That would feel right in my opinion.
Yeah, it would. But him at Manchester United, no. At Manchester United, you're going to have to build a squad. He never had to build a squad at Real Madrid. He just inherited a great squad that was disenchanted from playing under Rafael Benitez, and it was just have the personal touch, stroke their egos, tell them how great they are, and look at the greatness that they'll give you. I'm sure it was a little bit more complicated than that, but certainly the way Real Madrid went about their business, it was very uncomplicated. And if they did need bailing out, Ronaldo would have an overhead kick, or Gareth Bale would score the greatest European Cup final goal ever. It was an enviable squad to inherit, and he managed it perfectly as far as the Champions League campaigns went. And he went back there and they weren't as successful. And you saw with the choice of replacement there and Carlo Ancelotti from Everton, that Real Madrid is quite a unique club in that if you're this laissez-faire coach who was a great player, who has a very good rapport with very good footballers, that suits that club very well. As I said, Ancelotti was borderline in the doldrums. Bayern Munich players wanted him out because they thought his training wasn't intense enough. So that's why you need a specific manager for a specific club. Now United, I think with Ten Hag, they needed a disciplinarian. They got a disciplinarian in. I don't think they should renege on that as quickly as some think they should at the moment, because this club cannot go back to kowtowing to player power. And I know every club, when they're in a downward spiral and things are going badly, it's always the manager who pays the price, and United will be no different. But I think United just need to suck it up at the moment. They need key personnel changes at the top. They need to revoke Ten Hag's autonomy on recruitment as well, have a more objective specialist overseeing that, and then see where they go from there. And if Ten Hag's not the right fit, then maybe you can change things, but I suspect that won't happen.
I know I sound like Captain Hindsight here, and we're saying revoking his recruitment kind of power is a sensible thing, but it was a sensible thing to do from the start, surely.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been saying it for years, the club should have a line structure, and if we go back to...
What major club would have signed Tyrone Marshall?
Or, I mean, any of the signings.
He was going to Lyon, and also, if he played well against Ajax, he will have played well against Antony. Now, as many left-backs have shown, that is not difficult to do. So, in terms of your due diligence, your recruitment, the profile of player you go for, that just didn't make sense.
I mean, Ten Hag's been a kid in the sweet shop. He's went, I want this, and they've given him everything. They've given him the Mars bar, the Milky Way, and it's ended in a disaster. He's thrown it all.
But were they produced in the Netherlands? Those waffles?
Oh, come on! I couldn't produce some Netherlands confectionery. I'm not that good.
You've got those nice waffles, haven't you, that they do in the Netherlands?
They did it when Ten Hag was unveiled as well. Do you remember the Heinekens and the waffles? That now seems like a long time ago. His first press conference, they put on waffles and Heineken at United Old Trafford. Come on, you must remember that.
What?
Do you not remember that? That's a factual. It's a factual fact.
What, he's unveiling?
Yeah, at his first press conference, maybe not.
Yeah, I went to it.
Yeah, 100%. Heineken, and anyone listening to this will know that, and I'll show you after. You would have wrote it when you were.
His first Manchester United press conference.
In May 2022.
Have you made this up?
I swear to God, We'll move on anyways. But
it was in the morning. If they're serving lager in the morning...
Because we're about to go to a part, I'll get it up in between the next part. But before that, Fulham, Copenhagen, Luton, before the international break. I said before, I think he'll survive before the international break. If he loses against Fulham...
I hope he does, because I've got a week off
But November. He should, shouldn't he?
He should. I've no faith, I've no confidence they'll win either of these away games. I mean, this is the dreadful position they're in. They've been really poor at Old Trafford this season. You think getting away from Old Trafford is not a bad thing. 5 of their next 6 games are away from home. But their away record under Ten Hag has been really poor as well. They won 8 away games in the league last season. It's been 2 away wins so far this season. We've seen some real horror shows in atmospheric to hostile grounds, and they've got, as I said, they've got Copenhagen atmospheric ground, the Parken Stadium. After the November internationals, it could be a horror trilogy: Goodison, Istanbul.
We'll come on to that in the second part, because the third.
But the saving grace you would think is Luton. But if they were to somehow lose that, then I'm not sure there's any coming back.
Luton would be the equivalent of Watford, wouldn't it, for Solskjaer?
Yeah, but I mean, at least Watford have been in the Premier League a few times in recent years, and the ground isn't, like having been to Kenilworth Road, it makes Fratton Park look modern and yeah. Before
we leave then, just for the next part, Tyrone Marshall, our good colleague, 23rd of May 2022, the tweet is sent at 11:31. Dutch waffles and bottles of Heineken in the Old Trafford press room. Erik Ten Hag is already having a positive impact.
I can't even remember that.
That's a resounding victory for me and you, Samuel.
Yeah, that is. I was clearly so fixated on my piece and my stories that, I can't remember.
Basically calling time.
I'd like to think I have a good memory as well, but I think I remember the bacon sandwiches, but that's about it. Yeah.
Not very Dutch, the bacon sandwiches, mind.
No. That's more of a British delicacy, I think it's safe to say.
That's it for part 2. We'll be back in a moment for part 3.
Whether it's the legendary Lionesses, grassroots or expert analysis of the women's leagues, Women's Football News has it all covered. A brand new monthly magazine packed with news, interviews and expert opinion. Don't miss Women's Football News. Pick up a copy today from participating retailers. Women's football is here to stay, and so are we.
Welcome back to part 3 of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, before we go any further, just the usual shout out to the Women's Football magazine that Reach are doing. So if that is your cup of tea, head across to the website. Some good content there, some interviews, etc. and analysis of the women's game. But back to United, Samuel. Casemiro was injured at half-time, as you said. Varane, his absence was explained because he was ill. Well, we just discussed that earlier as well, the potential of maybe some unrest, some speculation.
It's an interesting story from Mark Kleiman from Sky News, who broke the story about the strategic review. He's written that Jim Ratcliffe is to commit $300 million from his multi-billion-pound fortune to Manchester United Football Club's aging infrastructure as part of a deal to acquire a 25% stake that will be unveiled this month. So
that's just breaking as we've...
Yeah, I mean, Mark Kleiman has been... He got the story with... as I said, he revealed that the strategic review was coming, that United were going to be for sale. So he's the city editor of Sky News.
That's a hugely positive update, because in the last 2 weeks, we just said on Monday, it had gone a bit quiet, and that was a bit concerning. The club really do need Ratcliffe coming in, having a positive impact on it.
It needs to happen sooner rather than later, and an obvious thing to point out is, of course, you've got the January transfer window opening in under 2 months now, and you've got to be prepared for it well before then as well. And looking at United state, why shouldn't they be in the market for players? Why shouldn't they be trying to improve the squad? Why shouldn't they be trying to get rid of players as well? That shouldn't be ignored. So, there's nothing official from United at the moment, as of course they're very sensitive about the stock exchange fluctuating and having affecting that. So but that's come through from Mark Kleiman. That was just my
should we go back
notification.
Go back to Fulham then? I mean, because we've got a game tomorrow afternoon, 12:30 kickoff, Craven Cottage. Changes wise, you can't have Anthony Marshall starting again. I'd argue you can't have Anthony starting again. I'd probably play Mount on the right, obviously Hoyland down the middle, and I think Rashford has to come back into the team, doesn't he? Although he doesn't deserve to. I don't think Garnacho particularly pulled up any trees.
Unfortunately for him, he didn't cut it again as a starter the other night.
I mean, that's the problem with Rashford. We're saying, look, let's drop him, but I don't particularly think Garnacho was ready to start and have such a meaningful impact. I mean, we see it, and that's been his biggest criticism or area for improvement, hasn't it, Garnacho? He's not done it from the start of games.
No, he hasn't. He didn't really against Crystal Palace in the League Cup. He scored, which was clearly a positive, but I think his overall performance was unmemorable, to put it politely. He is still raw. He was pretty cheaply robbed of the ball by Livramento for the goal the other night, although I don't think he'd have thought in his wildest
it's still going to be stopped from there.
That would lead to a goal, and Livramento would actually claim the assist as well, given how far he had to run. But that's the problem at the moment. There's so many positions where it's one in, it's one out. Both of them are playing poorly. Rashford can't be relied on at the moment. Part of me would be tempted to just stick with Garnacho and just lay down the gauntlet to him and say, look, go and prove everyone wrong and show that you can do it as a starter, do it at the ground where you got that late winner last season, but do it from the start. Don't do it off the bench this time. Let's give him some backing, because he's not had enough starts this season. But as you said, I suspect it will be Rashford back in. But even midfield, I mean, I suppose, what's it going to be? Amrabat and McTominay, probably?
It's such a mess because it's just not settled.
And that was the midfield.
Ten Hag keeps banging on about the word routines. He keeps saying the routines on there. And I do emphasise with him a bit, because last season, there was such a settled team, same players. And that midfield this time around, it's just, I mean, is there been the same free for a sustained amount of games that's been effective? There's definitely not been.
No. I said on Monday, Kobbie Mainoo's got to come in the team sooner rather than later, and I was disappointed that he was playing for the under-21s on Tuesday night. I completely understand it. He's been out for a long time. They're trying to get him some semi-meaningful minutes in the Youth League, in the EFL Trophy, which are certainly more competitive than playing in
I was speaking
the
to someone
under-21 league.
after the game. Obviously, I was down at Salford, and they said that someone from United. They said they're trying to build up his minutes, and they would have thought probably not the most sensible thing to throw him into that game after injury. That's what they thought.
Yeah, I'd have thrown him in just of how badly it's going. I mean, he resumed. I think he started team training. It must have been 4 or 5 weeks ago now. So I get it's patience as well, and you don't want to risk a setback. And United have had so many injury issues this season that clearly some players have been rushed back. I mean, Martinez definitely was. Maybe Casemiro was as well. It doesn't help that United are very opaque with injury news. They don't tell us what the injury players get now. So there's an element of trying to dig a little bit more. I mean, you did that line on Tyrone Marshall, which as far as injury news, team news goes, was very standout because it was very specific, and United don't offer that specificity anymore in relation to team news, which I don't think helps matters in terms of the communication. Because essentially, what they're telling us is what they're telling the supporters.
It makes
as well.
it into a bigger deal as well, doesn't it? That's the thing, than it actually is. I mean, if, for example, Malacia, he had surgery. If they just said he had surgery, there would be no more questions after that. You'd wait until he comes back, and it would be a normal process.
Yeah, and look, it was clear. I mean, Luke Shaw was hamstring tear, but it was clear that because they wanted to sign a left back, that it was a bad injury. Just tell us that it's, rather than us finding it out, because eventually someone does find out these things as well. That's what journalists do. So in terms of the team, I mean, I think whatever team Ten Hag picks, there are going to be some supporters who'll sigh at some of the players who are selected because of the way it's going at the moment. He changed it a bit in midweek. He didn't change it as constructively as I thought he should have done, and they end up losing again. And then it's a case of falling back on the players who were part of the Derby defeat. I think that would be quite hackneyed, really. I don't think he needs to necessarily just revert to that. But there are certain players who just cannot start. I mean, but Dalot, it's fair to say he won't start after what happened in the week. I'm sure by the time a lot of people listen to this, there'll be some clarity on whether Rafael Varane travels. Hopefully, later on, we'll have the squad news as well. There's a chance of that, which isn't as...
Having Varane and Wan-Bissaka playing together is going to be huge, because it's half of the first choice defence, which unfortunately haven't played together this season.
Yeah, and in fairness, I mean, Ten Hag isn't seeking excuses either, but when you take Martinez and Shaw out of the team, it is going to have an impact, a bad impact as well, because not only are they two very good defenders, but they're quite courageous with the ball. They will step out of defence with the ball. Martinez's line-breaking passes were really effective last season. Shaw had a really good season last season. You'd have probably said those two were among the top 6 performers. I'd have said for United last season they were both excellent. So that has had a detrimental impact on the defence, and the alternatives are not great. Even though Maguire's had a little bit of form prior to the derby, but you're probably looking at a defence of, if Varane is fit, it'll be Varane with Maguire and Reguilon and Wan-Bissaka as the full-backs. But the front 6, it's almost like a tombola, really, in terms of who gets picked. Højlund's a certainty, Fernandes is a certainty, Rashford is probably a certainty.
So midfield,
the other three areas...
Is it McTominay, Amrabat and Fernandes then? I mean, it doesn't inspire confidence, does it?
No, it doesn't. And look, Fulham haven't had a particularly... They've not had a good start to the season. They were a lot better this time last season back in the Premier League.
Seems like they've turned the page on that.
But they had, yeah. I mean, I didn't watch their defeat to Tottenham, but someone said they played reasonably in that game and they could take something from it. And their 3 games against United last season, I know the last one, final day of the season, and it was very relaxed atmosphere, not a lot riding on it. But the game at Craven Cottage, United needed an added time goal to win that. At Old Trafford in the FA Cup, Fulham were the better team for 70 minutes until they imploded with the Willian handball on the line, and they had 3 red cards in in probably as many minutes. So and United ends up winning against nine men, as Marco Silva was the third one to be sent off. So it's not going to be easy for United. It's never easy. Their wins this season, bar that League Cup game, they've all been by the odd goal. If they do get a win tomorrow, I'll be pleasantly surprised if it's by more than one goal. I think it's going to be a very testing game, and it's going to Craven Cottage, they'll have brilliant backing. United, it's a great away end at the Putney Road end, and it's a brilliant ground as well to go to. It's certainly not an intimidating ground either. So this is very much the calm before the storm of Copenhagen, Goodison, Istanbul and Newcastle.
A win would be huge, wouldn't it, if they can get an away win after that mess of a week? To go into that Copenhagen away game,
it really would. It could, Dalot claimed the Brentford game was a turning point about half an hour after it, and I thought you can't say that just yet. A win at Fulham, again, nobody would be saying it's a turning point. You've got to back it up. But going into next week with two big games. I mean, it's big games every week, but it would feel huge if they were to win. So
I mean, the frustrating thing is we have these quote unquote turning points, and we're still waiting for them to kick on, and they just keep on regressing on. That's the thing. Yeah. So a bit of a mess at the moment, but thank you very much for your time, Sam.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks to listeners as usual. Head across and check out our social channels, YouTube, TikTok as well apparently, etc. And enjoy your weekend. Take care.